Alrighty, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the September 2022 Nashville Power BI User Group meetup. Thank you guys for being here in the middle of the day. I appreciate it. I think we got some interesting stuff for you guys today. This is my first time doing this presentation on Power BI and application lifecycle management, so not sure how this will go or how long it will take, but I would love any feedback that you guys have, so do feel free to shoot me a note with whatever suggestions you have. And we might end early, it's very possible, but I promise you we'll definitely get you out of here by 1 o'clock at the latest. So today what we're going to do is, oops, excuse me, sorry, we are going to, so for those of you who are in person in the Nashville office, in the Nashville Microsoft office, Will should have some pizza there, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. For those of you who are maybe doing remotely, sorry?
We do have pizza.
Yes, excellent, excellent. So for those of you who are joining remotely, we encourage you to have a bite. So enjoy the lunch hour, and hopefully this will be informative. We've got some announcements for you guys, basically just sort of keeping up on what's new in the Power BI world and so forth. And then I'm going to go over application lifecycle management and Power BI. I think this is a really interesting topic. It's something I've been focused on quite a bit for the last close to a year now. And so I've got some lessons learned from my team that we've been working on this. And so I'll be the first to say that there is no one size fits all solution. So, take some of this, take any of this, take none of it. But hopefully there'll be something here that you guys can utilize. We say that this is from the pre-COVID world. We want to stick around for social hour. So we're happy to stick around for as long as you want. But we recognize that it's lunchtime and people have to get back to their works, to their day jobs. So if you want to stick around, by all means, we'll be here for that. So let's get into the announcements. So what's new? So for those of you who are not aware, the 2022 National Analytics Summit is coming up imminently. It's tomorrow and the next day. If you are not yet registered, I encourage you to get registered. I presume that there are still tickets available. So it is a tremendous conference. I've been several times in the past and always gotten a lot of value from it. It is basically the premier data analytics conference in Nashville. It's at the Omni, so it's right downtown, and they have dozens and dozens of speakers, several hundred attendees, and so if you have the chance to attend that, I definitely encourage that. Doesn't take a second to call out the Power BI user group that we've set up. So if you guys are not a member of the user group, we encourage you to check that out. And we also wanted to call out the YouTube channel. We're up to 170 subscribers as of yesterday when I took the screenshot. So hopefully we'll get a few more and keep punching that number up. We've got a pretty considerable catalog of back videos now, and we've got some really interesting presenters. Daniel Odekier, Steve Wexler, Alberto Ferrari was one of the presenters, and so on. So it's so we've got some really interesting stuff up there. So in terms of the what's new in Power BI, so so the September update just came out recently. There wasn't a whole ton of really big things. I think one of Microsoft's conferences, like there were sort of big conferences being built. I'm not sure. I think one of those is coming up maybe next month or something. So they might be saving up a few things to. They usually do a big dump of a lot of major features when those conferences happen. So they might be saving up for that. Yeah, so you can sort of see the new feature sets here. These are mostly sort of a convenience of life type of improvement. So there's not too many major upgrades here. So I will say the one sort of major thing that came out very recently was the public preview of multiple audiences for Power BI apps. And this is something that my stakeholders have been asking about over and over and over and over again. So you've got a workspace, you've got an app in that workspace, you have multiple different reports. And they want to be able to show some of those reports to one audience and other reports to other audiences, and so forth. And up until very recently, that was not possible. In fact, it's still not even generally available yet. But so as a public preview, you can utilize this function, and so it now makes it possible to do that. So if you've ever had anybody request that, I encourage you to give that a try. They're doing now a what's new in data marts section. I would love for someone to do a whole presentation on data marts. Data marts are basically sort of data warehouses built in. It's SQL is Azure SQL database under the covers, as is my understanding. It seems like there's a lot of functionality, and one thing I only recently learned, because I haven't had a chance to dive into this much, is that you can store your DAX logic centrally. And so the idea is that, sort of going back to the notion of having one data set to rule them all, or, a handful of data sets to rule them all, that you might have this data mart where you sort of singularly position your business logic and DAX functions and so forth, and then you get to utilize that. And so I feel like there's a lot of advantages there potentially. I haven't had a chance to work on that much myself. So Will, if you're taking notes on upcoming topics, I'd love to see you present on this and tell me all about what I can do with data marts.
Noted. And if anybody out there has used it and would like to share, please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some updates to Microsoft Purview data loss prevention policies. So for those who don't know, Microsoft Purview is sort of it's not a subset of Power BI, but it's very intricately involved in Power BI. It sort of spans across all of the Microsoft data products, SQL Server, lots of Azure products, I think even into Excel. And Purview is designed to sort of give you a view into where all your data is stored throughout the enterprise, and it helps you with tracking some metadata and some descriptions and so forth. But I think the most important thing is trying to understand the sensitivity of the data, who should have access to it vis-a-vis who does have access, for example, that sort of a thing. So it's trying to give you sort of a holistic view of where your data is, what your data exposure might be. You can put lots of policies in place. So for example, social security numbers should never be displayed in full. They should only be displayed the last 4 digits, for example. You can do lots of different things like that. And so they've anyway, so those are the data loss prevention policies that Microsoft Purview has, and so they've made some updates to that. And I haven't had a chance to dive into this, but there's announcing something called horizontal fusion, which is a performance optimization for Power BI data sets. So it's supposed to make them much faster. So I'm really interested to see what comes out of that. So for Power Apps, so they did come out with a new creator kit, which basically is a sort of a starter kit for a center of excellence. So they made some updates to that. They made some enhancements to the Power Platform API. So if you wanted to automate certain things in the Power Platform, you can via API calls, and you can do that. For example, one of the things that my team is doing, and this is going back to Power BI, is we're using a Python script to make an API call that triggers a data set refresh. So we can't use Power Automate in my company yet. We're beta testing that currently, but so we can't use the Power Automate tool to trigger the data set refresh, but we can do it via an API call. So that's one of the functionalities that you have. These are more for Power Apps and so forth. So this might be, say, like automatically installing an app for somebody, that sort of thing. And then there's some new PowerFX functionalities that they've put out there, including parse JSON. And one that looked interesting was name formulas. And if you read the article on that one, they likened that to in Excel, how you can name a cell. And for example, you can have a bunch of formulas that point to that name, and maybe then you go into the formula manager and you point that to a different cell, and it's the way to effectively update all of those formulas without having to actually go in and update each and every one of them. And this is kind of the same principle here. I think it's a little bit sort of like you might think of it like almost like a variable of sorts. But anyway, so it's got some interesting, it opens up some interesting use cases. Power Automate, so I'll just call out the automation kit, which again is sort of an enhancement to their Center of Excellence starter kit. This is essentially helping organizations who don't have a presence in Power Automate or not a formalized presence in Power Automate, as essentially a way for them to sort of kickstart that process. And the last thing I wanted to call out was the Power Platform is growing. And, so for the longest time, it was just Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, which used to be called Flow back then. Then not 2 or 3 years ago, maybe they came out with Power Virtual Agent, which was a low-code bot development framework. And then more recently, they came out with Power Pages. And so my understanding is that Power Pages is a little bit like Power Apps, but specifically for external facing. I think that that's the case. I haven't had a chance to really dive into that. But it's the new sort of fifth leg of the Power Platform. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the main presentation. All right. So today we're going to talk about the intersection of Power BI and application lifecycle management. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sort of cover what is application lifecycle management, because it's one of those things that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And then we're going to go over a few different techniques and possibilities. I'll be the first to say that ALM is not and does not have to be a one-size-fits-all solution. There's a lot of ways to approach this, and they're not all wrong, they're not all right for everyone. It's really about finding the solution that's right for you. So we're going to explore sort of a spectrum of what those might look like. So first of all, so what is application lifecycle management? Well, so put simply, this is a quote from Red Hat. Application lifecycle management is the people, tools, and processes that manage the lifecycle of an application from conception to end of life. So that's great, right? But what the heck does that mean? Well, I want to call out 2 things there. So first of all, notice it talks about the people, tools, and processes. So it's not just a piece of software. It's not just some technique of doing things. It's designed to be all-encompassing, right? So it is all of the things that it takes to manage that life cycle. So it's the people, it's the tools, it's the processes. So this is not a sort of singular view of how you want to manage the application lifecycle. It is more of a total strategic framework and even a cultural viewpoint of how you look at managing the lifecycle of your application. And the other thing I want to call out is that it talks about from conception to end of life. And so this means that you can begin applying the techniques of ALM from the moment that you think of something, from the moment that you conceive of an idea, all the way up to the point where you have deprecated something, you've end of lifed it, and you've switched off the application, turned off the servers, and you're no longer using that application. And this is something that that's a lifespan that could take decades. If you look at SQL Server, for example, SQL Server is something that is well over 40 years old, and it's still going strong. Windows, for example, is decades old. Excel is decades old and still going strong. And so the life cycle is something that can be indefinite, and it can last for a very long time. And ALM is designed to be applicable over that entire lifespan. So let's talk about the different stages of application lifecycle management, right? So first of all, you've got application governance. We start off with application governance, and you might wonder, like, well, why are we starting with governance? And the reason is that because if you end with governance, you're probably going to wind up doing a lot of things that you're going to regret sooner or later. And so we want to start with the governance and begin asking the right questions from the very beginning. And governance, covers a lot of different things. We could do an entire talk on just on governance, a bit outside the scope of Power BI, but it would be a fascinating conversation. And one that I would love to hear someone talk about who's more versed in ALM than I am. I don't claim to be an expert in ALM at all. But governance is, is more than just asking, have we put the proper security in place? Certainly that's a critical piece of it, but it's also about, thinking smartly about the resources that it's going to take to build it, the resources. It might be asking, the questions of, have we thought about how this, have we thought about this from a standpoint of equity, for example? Let's say that you're building an AI tool, and have we considered how AI might prejudice one group of people over another? We've all seen the articles about AI tools that you feed real data into the models to train them, and that real data reflects a world that has bias in it. And so it's no wonder that the models that are trained on that real world data come out with bias in them. And so, have we given consideration to how that bias might present itself and how we deal with that? That's just one question that we might want to ask ourselves in the application governance process, in the application governance stage. And this is the governance stage is something that we're going to deal with throughout the entire life of the application. So the next stage we want to talk about is the actual development. And so this is sort of what we think about most of the time, because this is what a lot of us who are here do on a day-to-day basis, that we are sort of putting fingers to keyboards and writing code. That code might be a DAX function that is sum this column. It might be average that column, or count something, right? It might be very simple. It might even be something in Excel. But that is the development that we're talking about, of actually building out the solution that we're working on. After you build it, the next thing you want to do is test it, and that testing, it might look like a dedicated QA team that does nothing but QA testing. And I'll be honest, I've worked with teams like that, and very good ones have a particular mindset and a frame of mind, and people who are good at application testing are very, very good at that, and they're sort of uniquely good at that. And so you might have a team like that does application testing full time. You might have someone who does it a little bit on the side. You might send your report to a stakeholder and ask them to verify it. You might spot check it yourself, and that's fine, right? Not everything needs to have the same level of complexity. So after you've tested the application, then the next thing you want to do is deploy it. And just as your applications can vary in sort of size and complexity, we all think of applications as being some executable on a desktop or some big web app. But when you publish a report to Power BI and you want to distribute that content, like what does Power BI call that? Well, they call it an app, right? I mean, you could make the argument that even an Excel file, it can be thought of as an app, and if it's utilized for something critical enough, it might be something that you want to put some controls or governance around. And so that deployment can be very simple, or it can be very complex. It can be, as simple as emailing something out to people, or it can be using build pipelines and deployment pipelines, for example. And I will describe that a little bit later, specifically in context to Power BI. And then once you move past deployment, the next phase is operation and maintenance, right? Because how often have we created something and we sort of put it on a shelf and never look at it again, right? Some of the times we can do that, but a lot of the times we're constantly coming back to something. Somebody wants an addition or enhancement, something breaks, you have to add a new month's worth of data. There's always something to be done. And so that's sort of the operation and maintenance piece of it. And so if those are the stages of application lifecycle management, what are the tools and functionality that we want to look at? And so whatever tool that you pick, you're going to want something that's going to have some form of version control. And so this will allow you to see your changes in code over time. You're going to want something that allows you to communicate with your team and stakeholders as well, and plan the new features that you're going to build, the bug fixes, and so on. You want a tool that's going to help you gather and define your requirements so that is clearly articulated for everyone to see. You're going to want a tool that helps you do that testing that I talked about, right? So that if someone tests your application and they find a bug, so maybe you create a Power BI report and a DAX measure is creating incorrect figures, you want to be able to sort of create a ticket inside of that same ALM tool set that you can then do your work all in that same place. So you look at that ticket, you start your work on that, you go and fix the logic, and then put it back into your version control system and so forth, and you close out the ticket, and then it kind of goes back to QA, for example. So you want something that sort of integrates all of those different pieces. You want a tool that has source code management. And so this is something that we're going to spend most of our the demo time talking about. So there'll be a lot more on that to come. And you might want something that has automated deployments. And so this gets back to the build and deployment pipelines that I talked about. And those are something that are very complicated to set up and very easy to use if they're set up well. So those are sort of at the very end of the spectrum that I will describe in a moment. And those are great tools that have a lot of capability, but they're also very difficult to set up the first time around. But it's a really fascinating opportunity. And one reason why you might want to do this is that it allows you to really fine-tune and the separation of responsibilities. So you might have someone who is a developer, but you don't want them having the permissions to deploy to a production workspace. You might not want them to see the data in a production workspace. But you also don't want to wait for a scheduled weekly deployment in the middle of the night on a Saturday. So maybe you set up these deployment pipelines that it can deploy it for you, after certain checks have been finalized. And so this way you kind of get the best of both worlds. The cost is it can be very difficult to set those up initially. And lastly, you want a tool that can support your maintenance and support functionality. So going back to the sort of operations and maintenance stages. So if you find a bug in something after it's gone to production, we've also done that. We send something out and then we find out that there's something wrong and we have to work on that, right? You want a tool set that will help you to track those bugs, the work that you're doing on it, the changes in code that that are there to fix those bugs. All right. Okay, so enough about sort of the stages and the tools of application lifecycle management. I want to talk about how this actually interacts with Power BI. And so I would contend that there is a spectrum of techniques that apply in Power BI. And as a basic premise, I'm going to put this out there as, as sort of Michael McKinley's basic premise of ALM for Power BI, that not every Power BI report or project or solution requires the same level of enterprise grade, fully bulletproof ALM techniques, technologies, and tool sets. The complexity and the weight of whatever solution you implement should be in proportion to the size or the importance of the actual Power BI report or solution. And I say size or importance because you might have something that's sort of very large, and thereby that's the sole reason why you want to have something that is more robust. Or you might have something that's very small, but perhaps it's governed by Sarbanes-Oxley because it's reported out to the street, and you need certain governance around that Sarbanes-Oxley law requires. So you need audit, traceability, and so that necessitates this level of sophistication. And so, you might have a small report that is very important to the firm, and so that's why it mandates, the sort of the higher level of weight and complexity and sophistication. Very often you wind up with something that is both. They tend to be sort of very large and very important, and you need to make sure that changes to those are done very deliberately and in a very controlled, methodical, and purposeful fashion. That said, as I say, not everything is that, right? Plenty of times there are reports that are simply, you have some random question, or a stakeholder has a random question that they want you to answer. And you publish a report, you put it out there, and it's never thought of again. You don't need full-on ALM for that, right? You can just sort of put that out there and leave it be. And so therefore, the first level on the spectrum, what I would say is just do nothing. That's, I think, a perfectly fine option some of the time, right? You just have a report, you publish it, you share it, maybe you keep it on on your OneDrive, maybe, and and maybe that's good enough, right? That's not really what we're here to talk about, because we want to focus on some of the more exciting techniques, but I would contend that some of the time that's a perfectly viable approach. But let's say that you want something that's more sophisticated than do nothing, right? So what are your other options? Well, the next option in this spectrum is file versioning. And I promise you, probably every person on this call has done this at some point in their lives, right? That we just have versions of the file with dates appended to the file names. I've done this where I have multiple files for the same day, and I'll put an A, B, C, D at the end of it. Like I say, we have probably all done this at some point in our life. There's a number of problems with doing this. While it's very simple, there are some consequences. One of the problems is that your save points just may not be frequent enough. All right, so if you do something that sort of blows up your model, I mean, you're probably not going to completely destroy it, but you can definitely wreak some havoc. And if you do that, and you want to go back, if you only say one version a day, one version per major release or something, that may not be a frequent enough schedule on which to save a new version. And so that could be a problem for you. The flip side of that is you might save it too frequently, and if you're saving 12 copies a day, that's that file size is going to add up, particularly if you're working on a 100 megabyte or gigabyte Power BI X file, a PBX file, which certainly lots of us have worked on files that big and bigger, and so if you keep tons and tons of files, that can become rather costly. People may forget to save a version of it, right? So someone may mean to save a version at some appropriate frequency, but they just simply forget. They're in a rush, they save the file, they publish it, they forget to save out a copy of it, right? And again, I'm sure we probably all have done that at some point. Another potential problem is that the files can be deleted. They can be lost, they can be corrupted, they can be forgotten about. If you're putting these, and this specifically, I'm talking about probably putting them either on a hard drive or maybe like a network share, for example. And we've all seen those network shares that are terabytes in size, and there's a 1,000 folders and subfolders and subfolders, and you work on some project, you come back a year later, or maybe somebody else comes back a year later to pick up where you left off. Maybe you're no longer at the company, and they can't find your working files because they don't know where you put them, and that wasn't documented somewhere. So there's lots of ways that these files can sort of be lost to history, so to speak. I've already mentioned that the storage size can become considerable. If you have 50 different versions and they're all a gigabyte in size, then that can really add up very quickly, particularly if you do that for every single solution that you have. And this is basically, well, if you're working on a file size that's say 100 megs, if you have a bunch of copies, that can become expensive. If you're working on something that's a terabyte in size, and I saw a person who was working on a 1 trillion record data set in Power BI, at that point, saving out multiple files is basically a non-starter, right? It's not costly, it's just flat out impossible, basically. And so if you're working on something that is very, very large, then this is just not going to work for you. And the last thing I'll call out is that seeing your changes from one version to another, while you have the different versions, seeing what has changed from one version to the next is not at all very easy. So it's not obvious sort of what has changed. You can use a tool like ALM Toolkit, for example, that will you can sort of point it at 2 different PBX files, and it will tell you what is different from one to the other. So there are ways to make that a little bit easier, but on the outset, though, this is it's very non-trivial trying to figure out what those differences are. So let's say that you want to sort of up your game a little bit from file versioning on just like a big share drive or your hard drive, for example. Well, another sort of variant on this is file versioning on OneDrive or on Sharepoint. This might be something, if you're working on a team of people, this might be a good way to do it, because you can have a folder in OneDrive for your team, or you can do it in Sharepoint. And this, instead of saving a different version with a different file name, what you can do here is you work in one copy of the file, and every time that you save it, OneDrive, Sharepoint, it keeps the old versions for you, and you can go back and get those old versions. And so if you sort of completely wreck your file, you need to go get an old version, then you can go back and find previous versions of that file. So like I say, so it keeps a version of it every time that you save it. But the problem is that it may not be permanent, right? So these typically not going to keep every version for posterity. It's usually going to keep them for, 30 days, 90 days, something like that. And then it's going to get rid of them, get rid of the old versions. It's not always trivial. Like while you can go get old versions back, it's not always trivial to go get old versions. Whereas the previous example that I was talking about, the old versions are just right there. You just go grab whichever one you want. And with a tool like SharePoint, getting the old versions is maybe a bit more difficult. Again, the storage size can be considerable. Typically, these tool sets have a technique that sort of retains a delta between two versions. And so if you have two versions and you made a small change, 99% of those two versions might be bit for bit the same. And so typically these tools can look at that and say, okay, these two files are nearly the same thing, but here is what's different. And it can say, okay, I'm going to save this one version of the 99% that's the same, and I'll save each of the 1% that's different. And so what the consequence is that you reduce the that storage need quite a bit. But as those changes begin to add up, then again the storage may or may not be considerable, depending on how big your files are and how much changes that you're making to them. Again, this is not at all practical for very large data sets. If you're working on a 100 gig data set, this is basically a non-starter. And again, seeing changes from one version to the next is non-trivial. All right. So moving on. So the next one is Power BI pipelines. So we're going to demo this in a few minutes. This is a great tool. Let's see. So Jennifer Waxman is saying we use GitHub for version control. Just make sure you use LFS tracking on that repo if you are loading in non-code files, e.g. Power BI and Excel. So that is a great tip, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. I'm not sure what, Jennifer, I'm not sure what LFS tracking is. Maybe she could put a descriptor in there, but I do have some ideas on that coming up in a bit. Okay, so we're going to demo Power BI pipelines in a few minutes, but just a few comments on that. So one nice thing about Power BI pipelines is you can control access by workspace. So you have a workspace for generally development, one for testing, one for production, for example. And you can give the developers access to the development pipeline, your QA team access to the QA workspace, your report consumer access to the production workspace, for example. So you can really lock that down. And maybe you don't want, if it's HR data, for example, maybe you don't want the development team or the QA team seeing live HR data. And so you want to be able to control that access. It gives you a bit more functionality on how to control that access. All right, thank you for that explanation, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, so we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. So I do have a demo for using. We're actually going to use talk about Azure DevOps and version control in a few minutes. But that's a great suggestion, Jennifer. Another point on Power BI pipelines. So you do have the ability to roll forward changes to either the data set or the visualization separately. So, when you publish a PBX file, it'll publish two different things. It'll publish the data set and it'll publish the report. A really good practice to get into is separating those two. So having one PBX file for your data set, a separate PBX file for your visualization. But this will allow you to roll forward changes to one or the other, but without rolling forward changes to both. So if there's some reason why you might want to do that. One caveat, though, is that you cannot roll forward individual code changes. So let's say that you're working on two different changes in the same data set. You can't roll forward, you can't deploy one code change in a data set without deploying the other code change in the data set. And that second code change may not be ready, right? It may not be finalized. It might not be production worthy. You might not want that going out the door. And so there's not the same level of granularity here with this technique as there is with some other with the final technique that I'll show you in a moment. So while Power BI pipelines are relatively very simple compared to the final approach that I'll show you, there's not quite the level of granularity or control that you have with the final option. Another problem is that you have very limited traceability. So I am not familiar with any way to see who deployed what when. There might be, if you have admin rights, tenant admin rights, there might be some sort of PowerShell or API command that will allow you to see who deployed what data sets when. Maybe, I'm not sure about that. But even then, you would have to have certain permissioning, and it would be rather difficult to go get that. I'm not familiar with any way that you can see that very easily, versus if you use a tool like GitHub or Azure DevOps, that does become much easier to see that. Another problem is that you cannot do a code diff. So a code diff, or a code difference, is the ability to see side-by-side changes over time, to see who made those changes. And typically, if those changes are associated with a work ticket, then you can even see within that work ticket, you can see the reason for why that change was made. So if there's a certain bug, some DAX logic is not giving you the correct results, there might be a conversation in that ticket as to how that came up. Oh, the CEO was looking at this and figured out that these numbers were wrong. This needs to be changed ASAP, right? So you get some color into not just what changed, but who changed it, when they changed it, and maybe even why, a bit about why they changed it. And like I've already said, this is a relatively lightweight option compared to the final option that I will show you. This is, Power BI pipelines are a nice middle of the road for adding some governance, adding some, some control over how you deploy things, and really sort of professionalizing that approach, but without all of the sort of weight and heft around the final solution. So the final solution is something that I've been working on with my team for close to a year now, and it's something that I've been really interested in. I think it has a tremendous amount of potential, but I will be honest, this is a very, as I say, sort of heavy, complex solution to implement, but there's a lot of functionality and a lot of capability that's in this. So this is why I say not every solution is right for every Power BI report that you put out there. So it's really up to you to sort of judge how much energy you want to put into the governance of your particular report. And you can switch that from basically from workspace to workspace to workspace, essentially. So getting back to what Jennifer was mentioning, there is an opportunity to use a tool like Tagware Editor and Git to essentially change the data set into code. And so for anyone who's not familiar, the PBIX file is essentially a zip file with a different file extension. And you can literally change the file extension of a PBIX file to .zip, and then unpack the file and start diving through the contents to see what's inside of that PBIX file. And it's kind of neat to do that. I would say don't change anything and expect to be able to put it back together and publish it. You can, but you're just as liable to break something and it won't compile. And I don't ever change anything directly in the code, and I've been at this for quite a while, and even I don't do that. So I wouldn't encourage that, but it is neat to sort of understand the pieces that make up your Power BI file. I think it helps to become more familiar with how it works, how Power BI functions, right? So if you do that, there's a file in there. I think it's called model.json, if I remember correctly, and it basically is the code the code essence of your data model. It is the code that says this is how your data model should exist. It's not any of the actual data that is in the PBIX file, hence why it might be so very large. but this is just the metadata of the model. And for whatever reason, it is one humongously long line of code. And a code diff, if you've ever seen that done, is generally done line by line. And so it'll say, okay, these 7 lines are exactly the same. Oh, I see, here's a line that's missing, here's a line that's been added, here's a line that's there in both cases, but it's different in one version versus the next. And so it will call out those differences and sort of ignore the pieces where everything's the same. Well, if you have one massive line of text, any change, small or large, it's really hard to find where that change is. And so a tool like Tagware Editor, there's a function called save the folder. I'll demo that in a moment. That will that basically will export your model to a bunch of JSON files, and it makes it a lot easier to look at your code, to do diffs on your code, and so forth. Couple of caveats. So first of all, one thing you're probably going to want to do is so, as I say, you should be separating your data set PBX file from your visualization PBX file. While this essentially removes the need for that dataset PBX file, theoretically, I would encourage you to keep that PBX file, to keep both of them. You have to keep the visualization file because this technique basically does not really do a good job for that. There's not, to my knowledge, a tool that does a great job for the visualization component. And so just like what Jennifer was talking about, you essentially would just have it as a binary in your repository. And so you could keep different versions of it. You can associate it with tickets and you can see who made the changes and when and why. But you just can't necessarily do a code diff and see, code for code, what has changed in the visualization. But at least you can do that for the data set, and I'll show you guys that here momentarily. So one nice thing about this is that you can very tightly control who can do what via role-based access control. So you can have certain access for developers, certain access for code testers, certain access for maybe key stakeholders who are sort of governing, maybe who's a business owner, for example, and very interested in making sure that everything is working correctly. They might be like a product owner, for example. You might have anyway. So you can tightly control that access. Like I say, you can see the code diff. So after you've converted your model to JSON documents, you can very easily look at code diffs and see new files, deleted files, changes in the files, and so forth. And you can also see, who made the changes when. With associated tickets, you can see, a lot of the conversation around why a change might have been put in place. You also have the ability to roll forward individual changes. So if I'm working on one change and somebody else is working on a different change and they're in the same data set, I can roll forward my change even if the other change is not complete, and that won't go in until it's ready and tested and ready to go forward. So that's a nice bit of granularity that you can have. This is the most difficult process to implement, particularly if you're adding build and deployment pipelines. We just don't have the time to go into building, to creating build pipelines and deployment pipelines. And unfortunately, I actually don't have any myself to show you, but I will sort of point you in the right direction to get more detail on that. So regrettably, that's a bit outside of the scope of this conversation, but I am going to show you the rest of it. I'm going to show you sort of the interaction with Tagware Editor and Azure DevOps. And so I have access to Azure DevOps. That's what I'm going to show you is Azure DevOps. But Bitbucket, GitHub, and other tools are very similar in there, and they work the same at a conceptual level, but just the clicks are going to be a bit different. One other nice thing that you have in Tagware Editor is a tool called Best Practice Analyzer. And what this will do is it will compare your model against various best practices, and you can define what those best practices look like for you. Let's say that you are adamant about having proper capitalization and spacing in anything that is visible to in the model that gets published. You can set up a rule that everything that is visible has to have proper capitalization and spacing. And you can even cause the deployment to fail based on that if you want to, so that it won't deploy until someone goes in and fixes it. Anyway, the best practice analyzer is a really great tool that's built into Tagware Editor. Unfortunately, I won't have time to show you that today, though. And as I've already mentioned, while this does work very well for the data model, this is still not a great solution for the visualization component. And so you basically just need to keep the PBX file somewhere, and the easiest place would be in the same repository as a binary file. So so going back to what I talked about, the sort of very large trillion record data sets, for example, it's basically, this becomes essentially the only workable solution for that. Imagine you could do things with incremental refresh, or Will showed us 2 months ago a really neat technique for loading only a small subset of the data using a trick in Power Query that I thought was really fascinating. And you can do that, but the problem is, if every time you publish, you would have to then reload the model, because you're not making a metadata only change, you're actually republishing. And if you republish either the full or a partial data set, then you're either publishing the full data set, or if you're publishing a partial data set, you have to go refresh the entire data set with a new object. Versus if I make a metadata only change, I only have to publish that metadata change via a tool like Tagware Editor, and then I don't need to go and publish the entire file, refresh the entire data set. And if we're talking about 1 trillion records, that can really be an onerous thing to have to do, and I don't want to have to load that entire data set any more than is absolutely necessary, right? So for extremely large data sets, this is possibly the best solution, and it may be the only workable solution for a data set that is that large. So I mentioned that this is sort of a spectrum of possibilities, and so this is, I don't know, just some rough estimate of what that might look like. And with more complexity becomes more capability. You'll notice that the do nothing is not at the center of the capability, right? Because while it's dead simple, there actually is some value in that, and there might be a reason why that's the right solution for you. You really have to find out, you have to figure out for yourself what is the right solution for your needs. And as I say, not every solution requires bulletproof enterprise grade application lifecycle management techniques using Tagware Editor and Azure DevOps. That's just not something that every single Power BI report in the world requires. In fact, a very small subset of them will need that. But that's what we're here to talk about. So that's what I'm going to demo for you guys. I'm actually going to demo both the Power BI pipelines and Tagware Editor and Git. All right. So demo time. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to show you guys actually the file versioning, the very first one that we talked about, other than the do nothing. I just wanted to show this to you just to make sure that everybody knew what I was talking about, right? We've all done this at some point, right? You sort of append the file name. You might have a sort of live version that doesn't have the file name, maybe however you want to do it, right? And we've all done this. We've all forgotten to save some version of it before, so. But so what I want to do now is sort of moving past it. I want to show you the Power BI deployment pipelines. So what I have here is a workspace called Nashville Powered by User Group Demo _dev. So this is our development workspace. You'll notice that it says development here. This means that it is set up in a deployment pipeline as the development workspace. Now, you'll notice over here that this says that I have a little red triangle. Basically what this means, this is a sample that I downloaded from Microsoft. So I didn't build this. This is a sample. You guys maybe have seen the sample before, and it points to somebody's Excel file, and I don't happen to have that Excel file. So that's all that this is pointing. This is all that this is saying. So, just imagine that this was pointing to, say, a database, for example. So this is already set up in the test environment. If we click on workspaces over here, you'll notice that there is a demo _test. Sorry, I said that wrong. This is the dev environment. It's set up as the development environment. We have an _test, and that is set up as our test environment. And then we also have one that doesn't have anything appended to the name, and that is our production environment. Just as a personal preference, you can do whatever you want. As a personal preference, what I like to do is not put production at the end of the name, and just anything that doesn't have that is basically tantamount to a production environment, right? Because we don't want to sort of confuse the point for anyone who might be a report consumer. We just make it sort of dead simple for them, and for all they know, this is it. This is all that they need to know about, all they need to worry about, right? So if I click on deployment pipelines, so we have a list of all the deployment pipelines that I have access to. I just have the one demo here. And so we've assigned, so there's 3 environments here. There's a development environment, a test environment, and a production environment. And we've got the workspaces assigned to those environments. So again, we have our dev environment, dev workspace for the dev environment, test workspace for the test environment, and this one for the production environment, right? So no real shocking surprises there. We can look at all the different content, so all the reports, data sets, et cetera, that are in each of these workspaces, and we can do a compare, and this will show us that there is a difference here between this data set in the development workspace and the corresponding data set in the test workspace. So what that means, so you can see that there is not a difference between the visualizations, right? So I didn't change anything in the visualizations. I only made a change in the data sets, and specifically, I know what I changed. I added I just added one new DAX measure just to create a difference, and I published that new PBIX file to the dev environment so that you could see what that looks like. And then if you compare test versus production, you see that they are in alignment, and so there is no difference between the test and the production environments. But I do have this code change here. So going back to what we talked about earlier, one problem is that you cannot see the difference you can't see what's different from one data set to the other. And furthermore, if I had some changes that were ready to go and other changes that were still in flight, I can't pick and choose. I'd have to push the entire data set or none of it at all, and that might not be ideal for you. But since this is only one change, all I have to do is I just say deploy to test. And so, so I click on this and it says, so I would check the data set, I would check the individual components that I want to publish, and then I would, to deploy to test. And I click on the deploy to test button, and so I say deploy, and this is going to spin for just a moment. It shouldn't take too long here, and this is copying one item to this workspace. One nice thing is that if you have the development data set pointed to a development database, and you have the test data set pointed to a test database, and let's say maybe the production data set pointed to a production database, it is supposed to be smart enough to understand that and keep that connection the way that you want it to be. And so as you publish, as you promote the development data set to the test environment, it is supposed to be smart enough to say, oh, okay, I see that the data set in the test environment has a connection string that is a connection to a database that is different from the one that's coming in. And so I'm going to keep the old connection, because you probably want this pointed at you want the new code, the new logic, but you want it pointed at the old, at the old test database, probably, right? And so it is supposed to be smart enough to do that. I have had some mixed results with that. So, I always check everything as I do it, to make sure that those connections are correct. Sometimes it works better than others. And now if we do a compare, so you'll notice that now the development and test environments are in sync, exactly as you would expect, because we deployed our changes and now these are in alignment. But the problem is that now the test and the production environments are different. And if we do a compare, we'll see again that these data sets are different. And so, if we were ready, if we had completed all of our changes, then we could simply deploy this to production, and it would spin for another moment, and it would deploy it to production, and you'd see that everything is in alignment. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that. We'll just deploy this to production, and this will spin for just a moment, and you'll see here that everything is, we're getting green check marks along the way. Everything is in alignment, and and everything is happy in the world. So that is the basic way that that Power BI deployment pipelines work. They're relatively lightweight and simple to operate. Yeah, so Will, you said you have a tip to point to the test database. I would love to hear more about that. You want to tell us that?
So you see that little lightning gear icon above the test environment?
Right here?
Yep. Mm-hmm. You can set up a rule. So for that data set, when I deploy it, you can put in what database you want it to point to in that environment. So
that's great.
That rule will make sure it's always pointed to a single database. Just wanted to throw that out there for you.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. I've seen someone who used parameters to change them, but I feel like that the deployment rule would probably be a better way to go. I think that's probably the way to do it. So thank you for that, Will. Appreciate that. So like I say, fairly lightweight compared to the final version. This is, I think, a great solution for a lot of people. This is going to work for a lot of people in a lot of situations. There are some things that it won't let you do. For example, like I said, you can't do a code diff. You can't deploy individual code changes, for example. So there are some small limitations. Okay. So let's move on to the last piece, which is Tagware Editor and application lifecycle management. So I have here Azure DevOps. And again, you can do this in Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, which is Atlassian, Jira, Confluence. They're all Atlassian products. Or you can do it in GitHub. They're all just sort of, Coke and Pepsi. They're all kind of doing more or less the same thing, just with different clicks. This is what I happen to be most familiar with. This is what I have access to. So this is what I'm going to demo this in. So right now, I'm looking at a repository. This is called Power BI and ALM demo. We're looking at the main branch of this right now. That is the only branch that I have. And I've got some stuff in here. We'll come to this a bit more later. And you'll notice that I have the sales and return sample.pbix file, right? And so this is the sales and return report, a sales and return sample report that is in these workspaces. So I mentioned earlier that you should keep the PBX file, is certainly, at least for the visualization report and for the data set. I am sort of violating one principle here, which is that I had not separated the two files out. Just for the sake of expediency, I didn't bother to do that, but that would be a great practice here. So bear with me 1 second, please. Okay, so let's say that we get a request to add a new measure. So we're going to add a measure called sum of sales. And so I'm going to come in here to the work items. And let's say that someone creates a work item, and I'm going to create a new task. And I'm just going to call this add sum of sales DAX measure. And I'm going to assign it to the engineer, who is me. And I'll just come down here and I'll say add sum of sales DAX measure to sum the amount column in the sales table. Okay, and we'll save this guy. And you don't have to create a ticket, but I just wanted to show you what this would look like. And if we come back to our repo, so where we were before with the files page of our repo, but so if we come to branches and I say new branch, and I'm going to say add sum of sales. Now you cannot have spaces in these names, so hence why I'm not adding spaces. And I'm going to associate a work item, and I'm going to associate the one that I just created, and we'll say create. And this is, by the way, this is totally optional. You don't have to do this, but it's nice to sort of have that history and traceability there. So I'm going to say create, and now we've got our sum of sales. Now, if I so if I come in here and I say a pull request, and so I'm going to create a new pull request. Okay, so it says that there are no changes. So let me see if I can. So, okay, so I probably need to make a change to this to make that a little bit easier to show. I was going to show you the difference between the two branches, but I'll show that to you in just a moment. So we can open up this this new branch that we've just created, and there is a button over here called clone. And so I'm going to click on clone, and I'm going to click on clone in VS Code. And there's a little bit of initial setup that you need to go through, and I've already gone through that, so you don't have to see me painfully go through all of that. So I'm just going to put this right here. And so you see it's cloning the repository. And so I'm going to say, I want to open this folder. And do I trust this works? Do I trust the authors? Well, yes, I do. I wrote it myself. So, well, actually, I guess Microsoft wrote it, but I put it in here. And so now what we see is we see a folder. We see these are subfolders. And here are some files. So let me actually go to Windows Explorer, and I'll show you what this looks like. And so if I open this folder, I'd say, let me actually, I want to do this a little bit more cleanly. Bear with me 1 second here. Close this folder. All right, so I'm actually going to delete both of these. Sorry, it bugs me when it has the -1 at the end of it. Doesn't really change any of the functionality. I just get nitpicky about stuff like that. All right, so I'm going to say open clone repository, and again, you see the same exact stuff here, and so now, so here's our folder. If we open this, here's all the stuff inside of that folder. Here's that PBX file that I was talking about a moment ago. And so we can sort of open this up, and so let's say I'm just going to click on this JSON, this database.json document, and so you can see the actual code that's in here. But so let me show you how we would do this. So I'm going to actually come back to Windows Explorer. I'm going to open this PBX file. And so I said I was going to make a new measure called sum of sales. Now I can do that by coming in here and, saying new measure, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a perfectly fine way to do it. So I want to show another way. So you can also come here on to external tools and you can click on Tagware Editor. And this will launch Tagware Editor, and it's already connected to the data set that is inside of this Power BI, that's inside of Power BI desktop. So to note, when you launch a Power BI, Power BI desktop and you have a data set in the file, so it's not a live connection, it is running a sort of mini version of analysis services. So you're basically running an analysis services model on your local instance. And so that's what it's picking up right here, is what that looks like. I can also, if I close this, I've already got Tagware Editor open. It's not connected to anything right now. And so I can say, and come here and I can say open, sorry, I can say open from model from an existing database. And so you can point it to a server. So check this out, just real quick. I want to show you what this would look like. So if I come to the, sorry, excuse me. If I come to the development environment, for example, and I go to settings and premium and give it a second to load, and it says this is the connection, the workspace connection. So if I copy this, and so I can come here and I can paste this in, and so I want to set it to integrated or Azure AD login. I hit OK. It's going to ask me to authenticate. And I will put in my password. Bear with me just 1 second here. And I'm just going to authenticate that sign in. All right. All right. And Will, can I just confirm you can still see Tagware Editor?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and so what it'll do is it'll show all of the databases. You'll notice that the parlance here is databases, or the data sets that you have in that workspace. So there is a sort of comparison between Power BI and analysis services, because Power BI is analysis services under the hoods and some other stuff as well. But the Vertipack engine is the same as what's running in analysis services. And so in analysis services, in that old language, so you would connect to a server, and each server had one or more databases. The sort of corresponding language in Power BI is that a workspace is tantamount to a server. So the connection string was the connection string for a so it was asking for the connection string for a server. So I gave it the connection string for that workspace, and then each Power BI data set in that workspace would be tantamount to an analysis services database. And so it says database here. So don't let that confuse you, that this is just the sales and return sample data set in the Power BI that is right here, right? And so I can also connect to it that way. So I actually want to do something different though. So I just wanted to demonstrate that, but I want to do something different. And I'm going to hit cancel here, and I'm actually going to click on that button again, and rather than connecting to that server, I'm going to connect to the local instance, and it should list every individual file, PBX file that you have open here. And so right now it shows my sales and return sample.pbx file that I have open right here. So we're going to click that that local host, and we'll hit OK, and it should pop right up. So we're not going to go into too much detail because this is not a demo on Tagware Editor, and we've only got about 9 minutes left. So I'm going to sort of move along a little bit. So if we look at this data set, there's a folder here called Analysis DAX. There's just a bunch of DAX measures in this table. And so if we find it here, there's essentially a bunch of different measures. So I'm actually going to say create new measure, and I want to, I'm going to call this sum of sales. And we'll come into the expression here, and I'm going to say sum the sales table, the amount column. And so we'll accept that. And so we can actually, sorry, excuse me. So I hit the wrong button there. So we can actually, save this out to the connected database. So let me just show you really quickly. So we're connected to this Power BI X file. And so there is no sum of sales measure in here. And so if we come back here and we say save to the database, and then we come back to PBI desktop, so we should see a sum of sales measure right here that we just created. Okay. Now, then what I could do is simply save this file and then publish this to the dev environment. And so I hit select and replace. And I'm not sure why, but earlier today, this was actually taking a while. So I don't want to wait for that to finish. So I'm actually going to carry on. And so now, okay, looks like it's done. Good. All right, excellent. And so we can actually, go to back to the deployment pipeline, and we can see that these, where they were in sync before, they now no longer are. So we see that there is a change. We don't see what that change was, but we see that there is a change. And so now if we come to Tagware Editor, and I can go to File and save the folder. Now this is sort of where the power comes in. And so so we synced down that repo to this location. And so we're going to save to folder to the same location. So I'm just going to say select folder. And one neat thing is that it only saves out the things that are new and different. And so there's really only one thing that is new and nothing that's different. And so since the last time that we saved it, and so that is this sum of sales measure. And so if we come to if we open up tables, we open up analysis DAX, we open up measures, and we'll see sum of sales right here. And we'll notice that this was made much more recently. I do this all the time. I forgot to switch my branches, so I'm sorry. I need to do that. So that is actually gonna so when I do that, what you'll notice though, that sum of sales. Okay, all right. Well, so we still have it. So you'll notice here that there are two differences, and so I can see what those differences are. So this sum of sales JSON is new, and this PBX file is modified, so it's been changed. So what I'm going to do is just so I need to enter what's called a commit message. So this is basically just a commentary on the commit. As I'm going to say added sum of sales, and we'll say commit, and then I'm going to sync the changes. So until I say sync, the changes are still only on my local machine. But now that I've committed the changes, so we can come back to Azure DevOps. And I'm going to refresh this, and we'll expand tables, we'll expand analysis, DAX, we'll expand measures, and we'll go to sum of sales. And as it says, you added this just now. Here is the name, the expression. You can see the history that it was added in this commit. You'll notice that we're still on the non-main branch, the branch that we just created a little while ago. So if I come back to branches, and so now I can say create a pull request. So a pull request is basically, so I have this code change that's in this secondary branch. I want to get it back into the main branch. How do I do that? Well, that's a pull request. And so you want to give it a title, give it a description. It's sort of pulled those automatically. So that's fine. I'm not going to change any of that. We'll go down to the reviewers. You can add reviewers. You can set up mandatory reviewers, default reviewers, and so forth. And so you can also assign a work item. Because I assigned this work item when I created the branch, it is associated with the pull request automatically. So I'm going to say create. Now, since I'm the only person in this environment, I can't really assign other code reviewers, but obviously it's not a great practice to assign yourself as a code reviewer. That doesn't really do a lot of good, right? But so that's what we're going to do today. So I'm just going to hit complete. And generally, in most scenarios, a merge and no fast forward is a pretty good way to go. I do want to check complete associated work items after merging, and I want to check the delete the branch after merging. So basically, I'm done with the branch. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm done with the work item, and I want to close it. So we're going to say complete merge, and it will it'll just take a second here. This pull request, by the way, can be composed of more than one commit, but this one happens to only be one commit. So if I open up this commit, you can see the differences, right? You can see that it says, okay, sum of sales, that this plus sign, that means that it is new, and you can see that file. You can see the differences here, and then this PBX file is what's called a binary, so you can't actually see into it, but it just shows you that there is something that's different. You can download the original, you can download the modified, you can go back and get old versions of it. Yeah, and so if we come back to files, and so let's go to branches real quick. So you see there's only one branch. We're back to the main branch. And if we come to files, and if we click on the list of branches here, again, there's only the one branch. And so we can come to tables and analysis DAX measures, and you'll see that we have sum of sales right here. And the history, we added it in this commit just about 4 minutes ago. You can compare different versions. I only have the one version, so it's not really much to compare it to. But you can imagine if you made changes to this, and I said average for some reason, then the old version would say sum, the new version would say average. So you get the idea how you can sort of see the changes over time. We don't really have time to get into build and deployment pipelines, but that's a fascinating subject. I will point you to one place, which is, you go to Tagware Editor, Daniel Odick here. In fact, actually, let me do something a little bit differently. Say, RBI tips, Daniel Odick here. So if you go to, yeah, okay, I think this should be it, hopefully. So, okay, sorry, let me try one more thing here. Sorry, I should have brought this up beforehand. I apologize. So if you search for Power BI tips, Daniel over here. So he did a series of 4 videos with Power BI tips, and so here's the 4th one. Yeah, I think this is the one that I'm looking for. So he did 4 videos, and I encourage you to watch all 4 of them. But in particular, this 4th one here is where he goes into detail on incorporating Tagware Editor and Azure DevOps, or really any DevOps tool, so Bitbucket or GitHub, what have you. And there's a lot of great practices that he goes into there. And he also incorporates both build pipelines and deployment pipelines. I wish I had the time to go into those, but regrettably, it is past the hour, so I am out of time. If you guys need to jump off, I certainly understand. Will, do we have any other questions real quick?
Let's see. Joel says, I've been working as an ALM Power app that lives inside of Power BI Desktop. It's going to be released as open source soon. I have to run. So I guess he included a picture. It looks like I'm having trouble too.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the link for that YouTube part 4. If you open that up, you should get the parts 1, 2, and 3. You can also find it on the Tagware Editor website. You can find the links to all 4 of those. If you can only watch one of them, watch this last one, but I encourage you to watch all 4 of them. Tagware Editor is a tremendous tool. I was just talking to Will at the beginning of this that while there is Tagware Editor 3 that is out, that is a paid version, Tagware Editor 2.x is free, and honestly, it does everything that I need. I actually have 3, and because it's an annual fee, I'm actually going to downgrade back to 2.x once the subscription runs out. It does everything that I need, and like I say, it's completely free. So I encourage you guys to get Tagware Editor and start playing around with it. It is a tremendous tool for the DevOps and the source control, but for a myriad of other reasons as well. All right. Well, that's all I've got. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them out. But otherwise, I realize that it's we're over time. So I appreciate everybody for the time. Jennifer, thanks for your comment earlier. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. I don't know if you mentioned, but Michael's actually at the beach right now and took some time off to present to us. So we really appreciate it, Michael.
You're very welcome. So, yeah, as soon as this is over with, I'm gonna go put on some sunscreen and get out there.
That sounds awesome. Well, have a great day, Michael. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. Good stuff.
Hey, Michael, I'm looking forward to. Oh, yeah. Sorry. By the way, Michael Hewitt's doing 30 Power BI tips next month. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. Should be fun.
Yeah. Everybody be sure to join that one.
Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.